I sat through a dinner where they mocked me. 3 weeks later, the house was mine and they were trembling. I once believed love meant sacrifice, but now I know some people will let you bleed so they never have to. It was a slow Saturday morning in early November, and I remember how the gray light filtered in through the lace curtains above the sink, catching in the steam that rose from my old kettle. The windows rattled a little in the frame as the wind tugged at the corners of the house, and the heater kicked on with its usual stubborn groan. The house was still, save for the distant creak of the porch swing shifting on its chain and the low hum of the refrigerator, both familiar and lonely. As I stood there pouring water over the dark grounds in my old drip coffee maker, a sturdy little Mr. Coffee that had seen me through 2 decades, I thought back to a time not too far gone when my son used to call me every Sunday without fail. Back when he still had his college textbooks stacked on the dining room table, and I'd warm up leftover stew while he told me about his classes, his dreams, his plans. "You don't have to worry, Mom," he told me once, voice full of hope and that boyish conviction only young men carry. "When I make it, you'll never lift another finger." I'd believed him. Every word. The coffee dripped slow and steady. I reached for my chipped mug, the one with the faded gold letters that once read, "World's Best Mom," and wrapped both hands around it for warmth. My joints ached a little more in the mornings these days. That familiar twinge in my left knee reminded me of the nights I'd spent on my feet during double shifts back when Gregory Jr. was little and I was the only nurse willing to work through snowstorms or flu outbreaks. The phone rang just as I settled into my chair by the window. The ringtone, an old country tune I hadn't bothered to change, rang hollow in the quiet. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered anyway. "Hey, Mom," came Gregory's voice, smooth and fast, like he was already halfway to something else. "Hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." It had been 6 weeks since I'd last heard from him, but I didn't mention that. "Not at all," I said, softening my tone. "What's going on?" He launched into a tale that I only half followed. Something about a car. A lease, a down payment he hadn't expected. "It's just a bump, really. Short-term thing. Brittany's going to flip if we don't get it locked in this weekend." He laughed, the kind of laugh that asked for understanding without ever offering any in return. "I hate asking, but could you float us 5,000? Just this once." I stared at the bare branches outside, the wind pushing leaves into little whirlpools at the edge of the lawn. "5,000's a lot, Gregory." I know. "Just until next month, I swear. You're always telling me not to stress, right? You'd be helping us breathe." Breathe. That word settled in my chest like a stone. I remembered the asthma attacks he had as a boy, me pacing the hallway, whispering prayers in the dark, praying for one more breath for him, never imagining the day would come when I'd struggle to catch my own. I didn't say yes right away, but I didn't say no either. That pause was enough for him. "I'll send you the wire info. Love you, Mom." "Love you too," I said, already reaching for my checkbook. After the call ended, I sat in silence. I took the small note off the refrigerator that read, "Florida trip. Someday." Folded it once, then twice, then tucked it into the back of my recipe drawer. I didn't cry. Not yet. That night, as I tidied the little den off the kitchen, I came across an old photograph. Gregory, 10 years old, grinning with chocolate on his cheek, holding a 4th of July sparkler in our old backyard. I'd taken that photo right after my second shift, still in scrubs, bone-tired and proud. I'd made a life for him. I'd made him feel safe. But something had changed. Somewhere between the wedding to Brittany and the move to Bellcrest Estates, my son had become someone I didn't entirely recognize. The next morning, I transferred the funds. My bank app displayed the deduction in neat, impersonal digits. 5,000 gone, just like that. No thank you, no call. Just a text from Brittany 2 hours later. "Thanks. Appreciate you stepping in. Again. That word hit harder than it should have, like my help was a given, not a gift. I stood in the kitchen staring at the phone, thumb hovering over the delete icon. I didn't press it. Instead, I placed the phone face down on the counter and walked to the back window, watching as the last of the red leaves blew off the maple tree. A few days later, Trish called from the community center, cheerful as always. "We've got a little Thanksgiving potluck coming up. You should come, Lorraine. It'd do you good to get out." I smiled into the receiver, even though she couldn't see it. "That's sweet of you, Trish. But I think I've got too much on my plate." She clucked her tongue. "You always say that. What are you, running a hospital from your kitchen?" "I just need to rest," I said, voice softer now. "But thank you. Truly." After I hung up, I sat alone at the kitchen table, the steam from my coffee fading into the stillness. I stared down at my planner, neatly color-coded. I'd circled Thanksgiving Day in green weeks ago. Now I hesitated. Something in me itched to reach for the pen, to uncircle, to erase, but I didn't. Instead, I turned to my ledger, my careful tracking of every payment made on Gregory and Brittany's mortgage, every deduction from my savings to cover their dreams. I'd never signed a contract, no formal agreement. Just my name tied to their home loan, a quiet support beam in the foundation of their perfect life. That night, the wind howled hard against the windows. I pulled my cardigan tight around me and stirred a pot of chicken soup on the stove. The quilt on the back of the sofa smelled faintly of cedar and old perfume. I'd once imagined wrapping my future grandchild in it. I tried not to think about the fact that Brittany hadn't mentioned kids in over a year. Later, curled up with the television flickering, I scrolled through old messages on my phone. So many started the same way. "Hey Mom, hate to ask," or "It's just temporary." And I had always answered. Always. But tonight, something inside me resisted. A quiet, firm voice I hadn't heard in years whispered that maybe, just maybe, I was allowed to stop. I lingered over Brittany's last message once more. "Thanks. Appreciate you stepping in." Again. I didn't reply. Instead, I walked to the hall closet and took out a photo album, one from years ago when I still hosted every birthday party, every Easter brunch. Smiles were brighter then. Gregory had looked at me like I was the whole world. Now, I wasn't even a line item in their gratitude. I turned the page and paused on a photo of my husband, Thomas, holding baby Gregory on the front steps. That old porch swing still creaked the same way, but everything else had changed. The kettle let out a long, sharp whistle in the kitchen, breaking my trance. I moved slowly, my knees stiff with the cold. As I poured another cup of tea, I wondered how long it would take for them to stop pretending I mattered. Not long, I suspected. I stared at that message for a long time, my finger hovering over delete. When I finally whispered aloud, "They don't even ask anymore." Sometimes, the worst kind of loneliness is being surrounded by people who only remember you when they need something. C'est gentil. It was the first Sunday of December when the invitation arrived, tucked in a glossy red envelope, thick and showy, like the kind you see in magazines advertising holiday cruises or exclusive country club events. My name was printed in gold foil, Mrs. Lorraine Mercer, as though I were being honored, not summoned. I opened it slowly, the sharp flap cutting against the pad of my thumb. Inside, the words leapt out at me, with all the subtlety of a billboard: holiday dinner at the Danvers residence. Formal attire. December 19th. Kindly RSVP. Danvers. Not Mercer. Not even Gregory. It was Brittany's parents' name across the top, her family's crest embossed on thick cardstock. The message was clear. I was being extended the courtesy of an appearance, not welcomed, just tolerated. I set the invitation on the counter and looked over at the dining table, where a small pile of unpaid bills and my checkbook sat like a courtroom I hadn't agreed to walk into. The silence in the kitchen stretched long and thin. I thought back to last Christmas when I had made Brittany's favorite sweet potato casserole, topped with crushed pecans, and she hadn't taken a single bite. "Too many carbs," she'd said, pushing the dish aside without looking up from her phone. I remembered the sparkle of the china I had lent her for that same dinner. My mother's china. The set with the tiny bluebirds painted around the rim. It had never come back. Outside, the frost still clung to the grass, turning the yard into a dull silver field. I sipped my coffee and tried not to feel it, the sting of being needed only for what I could give, a ride, a check, a casserole, never a conversation, never company. Later that week, I stepped into a boutique near the square to find something suitable for the dinner. My winter coat, the one I'd had since the early 2000s, suddenly felt too worn. I ran my fingers over a soft wool number, deep green, with a fitted waist and polished buttons. The tag read $169. The clerk smiled at me politely. "Need any help?" I smiled back and said no, though what I needed wasn't hanging on any rack. I left empty-handed, the bell over the door chiming behind me, a crisp little echo in the winter air. The day of the dinner arrived with a kind of cold that bites through your gloves. I stood in front of the mirror, tugging at a dress I hadn't worn since Thomas's retirement party. My hair sat a little flatter now, my eyes a little softer at the edges. Still, I looked decent, presentable, like someone who might belong. Bellcrest Estates was lit up like a department store window. Every house had symmetrical wreaths, perfectly spaced lights, and driveways wide enough for 3 cars. The Danvers house sat at the end of the cul-de-sac like a king surveying his court, wide, sprawling, intimidating. Brittany greeted me at the door with a quick smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Glad you could make it," she said, then turned away before I could answer. Inside, the warmth was suffocating. Men in navy blazers and women with perfect hair laughed into glasses of wine. A pianist played something festive in the corner, but it only made me feel more alone. I found a seat near the back of the room, nursing a ginger ale in a crystal glass. Gregory passed by twice without saying a word. Dinner was served at 8, long tables, formal place cards, food that looked too delicate to fill a plate. I glanced at my name, Mrs. Mercer, tucked between a Mr. Harland from the golf club and a woman I didn't know. Gregory and Brittany sat far down the table, beside Howard and Marianne Danvers, who toasted to legacy and family tradition with hollow pride. A server set down a plate in front of me, something with duck and figs, and I tried not to think about the pot roast waiting in my fridge at home. The man beside me chatted about vacation properties in North Carolina, barely pausing for breath. And then I heard it. "I mean, let's be honest," Howard said, loudly enough for nearby ears. "Some people contribute to the family and some just show up." Laughter rippled around him. Gregory didn't speak up. He didn't defend me. He didn't look at me. I sat frozen, fork suspended in the air, heat crawling up my neck. That was the moment, the turning point. The line that crossed everything I'd swallowed until now. I stood quietly, placed my napkin beside my plate, and walked to the powder room. I locked the door and stared at myself in the gilded mirror, my breath hitching slightly. I wasn't angry, not yet. I was something deeper, disbelieving, hollowed. I pulled out my phone and stared at the banking app, the running list of payments, transfers, covered overdrafts. My name wasn't on the deed, but my money lived in every floorboard of their pristine home. When I emerged, I didn't go back to the table. I found my coat, nodded at the doorman, and stepped into the night. No one stopped me. I drove home in silence, headlights cutting through the dark. The roads shimmered with a thin sheet of ice, and my hands tightened on the steering wheel. The house was cold when I returned. The heating had shut off again. I turned it on and waited, fingers numb. I poured a glass of water and sat on the edge of the bed, shoes still on. A part of me still wanted to believe it was a misunderstanding, that Gregory would call, that Brittany would explain, but the silence was confirmation. The next day, I called the mortgage company. The voice on the other end was cheerful, unaware of the weight in my chest. I asked to review the account, confirmed my standing as the co-signer, listened as the woman explained the balance and the due dates. Then I said something I never thought I would say. I won't be making any more payments. I'd like to remove myself from the account or be informed of the legal process to do so. There was a pause. Then her voice returned, professional and distant. Of course, ma'am. I can email you the documents to begin that process. Please note any withdrawal may require consent from the primary borrowers. I hung up, heart pounding. Later that evening, I got a call from Gregory. I let it go to voicemail. His voice was light, too casual. Hey, Mom, saw you left the party early. Everything okay? We missed you. Call me. I stared at the screen. I thought about replying, about saying, You didn't even notice I left. You missed me like you miss a loose penny in the couch cushions. But I didn't say anything. Instead, I opened my checkbook and drew a single line through the automatic withdrawal date I'd written for the mortgage. That line felt louder than any confrontation could have. Outside, a wind chime tinkled against the porch railing. The furnace hummed low, and somewhere deep inside me, a door finally closed. I thought of Brittany's thankless texts, of Howard's smirk, of Gregory's silence. Then I opened the folder in my desk drawer labeled Financial Records and began reading, not as a mother, but as a woman who had finally remembered the weight of her own worth. The chill deepened that night, creeping in around the windows and under the doors, but I didn't light a fire. I let the cold settle in. Let it remind me that sometimes you need to feel the freeze to remember warmth isn't always where you thought it was. I didn't cry. Not even when I looked at the calendar and realized Christmas would come without a single invitation from my son. Some debts don't show up on paper, but they weigh the heaviest on your soul. It started with the sound of the mailbox clanging shut. I'd heard that sound nearly every morning for 25 years, but this time, it felt louder, like a door slamming on something I hadn't yet named. I opened the front door and stepped onto the porch, tugging my cardigan close against the December wind. A single white envelope lay among the circulars and junk mail, addressed to me in Gregory's handwriting. Inside was a holiday card, standard, store-bought, and a gift certificate for a local spa. The message read, Merry Christmas, Mom. Treat yourself, on us. Love, Greg and Brittany. No call, no apology. Just a gift card to a place I'd never go, tucked into a card printed with someone else's words. I stared at it for a long time. Then I laid it flat on the kitchen counter, next to the invitation I still hadn't thrown away from the Danvers dinner. Both rested there like strangers. As I stood by the window, sipping lukewarm coffee, I remembered the day I co-signed the mortgage for their home. Brittany had baked a lemon loaf, still warm, and Gregory had poured me tea like we were royalty at court. It's just a technicality, Mom, he'd said, eyes bright with promise. You won't have to do a thing. We just need your name to help secure the rate. It's all numbers. I should have known then that the real numbers were invisible. The late-night transfers, the quiet sacrifices, the guilt I swallowed in silence every time their names flashed on my caller ID. That afternoon, I found myself standing at the local bank branch, the one next to the dry cleaner I used to take Thomas's shirts to. I asked to speak with a loan officer. The young woman who greeted me looked barely old enough to rent a car, but she was kind. She ushered me into a small office with a fake plant in the corner and offered me a bottle of water. I just need to understand, I told her, where my obligations end and what I still have control over. We reviewed the papers, every signature, every transfer, and as she spoke in her polished, technical way, I translated the words into meaning I could hold. My name meant responsibility, but not rights. My money had gone into a home that would never be mine. I had funded a dream I was not invited to live inside. I thanked her, gathered the papers she printed, and walked outside. The cold hit me hard. I sat in my car with the heat blasting and stared at the folder in my lap. I hadn't driven home yet when I pulled into Trisha's driveway. She answered the door in a Christmas sweater with tiny felt reindeer dancing across the hem. Well, now there's a face I didn't expect today. You okay?" I nodded, though the lump in my throat threatened to prove me wrong. She brought me inside, sat me at her kitchen table, and warmed up some chili she'd made earlier in the week. Her home smelled of cinnamon and onions, warm and honest. "I think I've been a fool," I said quietly. She set the bowl in front of me and sat across the table. "You've been a mother," she said gently. "Those two get confused all the time." I took a few bites, the warmth of the food settling something inside me. Then I pulled the folder from my bag and laid it open. Trish didn't need to read every line. She understood enough from the headlines. She listened without interruption while I spoke, not just about the mortgage, but about the spa card, the silence, the slow fading of my presence in my own family's life. "Do you remember the last time Gregory visited you just to visit?" she asked when I finished. I shook my head. I remember when he asked me not to bring a gift to Brittany's birthday party. Said it might make her parents feel awkward. Trish's face twisted into a grimace. "Honey, that boy doesn't know who he is without you holding up the sky for him." Her words hit something tender. "I don't want revenge," I said. "I just want to reclaim the pieces of me I gave away without knowing I was doing it." "You don't need revenge," she said. "You just need a spine. And Lorraine, you've always had one. You just forgot for a while." I stayed longer than I planned. We talked about gardening, books, the way the neighborhood had changed since we moved in. Before I left, Trish pressed a folded piece of paper into my hand. "My lawyer's name," she said. "He helped me settle things after Jim passed. He's honest." Discreet. Back home, I stared at the name and number written in her sharp, looping cursive. I didn't call. Not yet. But I put it in the same drawer where I kept my marriage license and the deed to the house I still lived in alone. That evening, I stood in the garage sorting through the old filing cabinet that had followed me through 3 moves. Among the folders was one labeled Gregory, Student Loans. Inside, I found a letter from a decade ago where I had paid off the final balance without telling him. A note from the lender had come with it, thanking me for my promptness. I had folded it neatly, as if I'd been proud. I took a deep breath and continued, folder after folder, receipts, bank statements, letters, a quiet paper trail of a life built in service of someone else's comfort. I didn't cry. Not when I saw the birthday cards Gregory had stopped sending. Not when I found the loan paperwork with my signature scrawled beneath his, but something in me hardened, like a tree rooting deeper into frozen ground. The next morning, I typed a list on a yellow legal pad, items to retrieve, questions to ask, accounts to revisit. I didn't know exactly where it would all lead, but I knew it was time to look with clear eyes. At noon, I called the number Trish had given me. A man with a calm voice answered. His name was Mr. Caldwell. I told him who I was, what I needed. I spoke slowly, deliberately, like someone who had rehearsed this moment not in words, but in aches. "I just want to know what my options are," I said. "That's the smartest place to start," he said. "Why don't we schedule a time next week?" We made the appointment, Wednesday at 3 o'clock. I wrote it in my planner and circled it twice. That night, I opened the spa card again. I considered calling the number on the back, booking a massage, maybe even a facial. But then I thought about who had paid for it, and more importantly, why. I slid it into the fireplace. The flames took it quickly. No drama, no flourish, just ash and warmth. And as I sat back in my chair, listening to the wind outside and the faint clink of the radiator warming up, I felt it again. That quiet knowing, the one I used to carry in my nursing days, the one that said, "You don't need to yell to be strong, you just need to know you're right. If peace couldn't be bought, then neither could I." People think silence means weakness, but silence is just where strength waits its turn. Snow had begun to fall the morning I walked into Caldwell and Myers, a modest brick building wedged between a pharmacy and an insurance agency in downtown Allensworth, the kind of place that still had wood paneling and coffee served from a metal pot beside a bowl of powdered creamer. I remember brushing snowflakes off my shoulders before stepping inside. the air smelling faintly of lemon oil and heating vents. Mr. Caldwell's office was warm, dimly lit, and lined with thick books that looked older than me. He rose from his desk when I entered, a tall man in his 60s with silver hair and a navy sweater under his jacket. His handshake was firm, his expression open, not kind in a performative way, but genuine, like someone who had learned patience from experience, not optimism. "I appreciate you making time," I said as I settled into the leather chair across from him. "Your friend Trish speaks very highly of you," he replied with a soft smile. "And from what you told me on the phone, you've been carrying more than your share." I placed the folder I'd brought on his desk. Inside were copies of payments, notarized forms, loan approvals, email printouts, and years of check stubs. A paper trail most would have thrown away, but not me. I was raised to save everything. He opened it slowly and began to read. Occasionally, he hummed low in his throat or raised a brow, but he didn't interrupt. I sat still, hands folded in my lap, eyes watching the snow fall outside the window. "You've essentially funded their mortgage and home expenses for nearly 8 years, he said at last, "without your name on the deed. That alone is remarkable." "Remarkable or foolish?" I asked gently. "Maybe both," he admitted. "But more than anything, it means you have leverage. Legal, emotional, and moral." He leaned forward, tapping a page. "And this promissory note from 2 years ago, was it ever repaid?" "No, not a cent. I never pressed him." "Then you have even more grounds to pursue restitution, especially since there's written proof." That note. I had written it by hand at Brittany's insistence after Gregory borrowed $12,000 to cover emergency plumbing repairs. She wanted everything documented for peace of mind. Ironically, it was her own neat signature beneath Gregory's that now served as a noose they'd tied for themselves. Caldwell explained the steps ahead, quietly, methodically. He spoke of civil claims, financial tracing, power of attorney, misuse. Words that sounded sharp and foreign, like tools I hadn't realized I was allowed to hold. We agreed to file preliminary paperwork to notify the bank of my financial withdrawal and begin assembling a case. When I left his office, the sky had turned a thick pewter gray. I pulled my coat tighter and walked slowly to the diner across the street, a place I hadn't stepped into in over a year. The booths were still vinyl, still patched in the same corners with duct tape. A waitress named Nina recognized me immediately. "Lorraine Mercer, is that really you?" She beamed. I smiled. "Still breathing, Nina." She poured me a hot cup without asking and slid into the booth across from me just for a minute, just like old times. "You look different," she said. "How so?" "Lighter, like someone who stopped carrying something heavy." I didn't answer, but her words stayed with me. Later that evening, back home, I sat on the edge of my bed with my planner open in my lap. I began marking dates, calls to make, letters to send, appointments to confirm. A soft knock interrupted me. It was Trish, bundled in a red scarf and holding a tin of gingerbread cookies. "Thought you might want these before I eat them all," she joked. We sat together in the living room, the television low in the background playing some holiday movie neither of us watched. She listened while I told her everything Caldwell had laid out. "You're really doing this," she said, eyes wide with something like pride. "I think I have to," I replied. "Not just for me, but for the version of me who kept giving, thinking love meant silence." The next week passed in a hush of snow and paperwork. I spent afternoons at the library printing legal forms. Mornings sorting statements, evenings reading quietly by the fire. The holidays came and went without a single call from Gregory or Brittany, not even a voicemail, and strangely, I didn't miss it. One evening, I received a certified letter, a formal notice from the mortgage company confirming the change in my financial status. I was no longer obligated. My portion had been removed, pending full agreement from the other parties. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because I had finally untied the first knot. Then came the text. Hey, Mom, any chance we could chat soon? Brittany and I hit a small snag with the house. Think there's a mix-up with the bank. Want to clear it up before year-end. Call when you can. Love you. I didn't answer. I waited 2 days. Then I responded with a single line. Please direct all housing inquiries to my attorney, Mr. Warren Caldwell. His office is copied below. Less than an hour later, my phone rang. I let it go to voicemail. The next day, Caldwell called me. They reached out, he said, his tone even. Rather upset. I explained your position, told them all future communication should come through me. You're protected now. And just like that, the dynamic had shifted. I was no longer the invisible safety net. I was a wall they could no longer climb. The silence that followed stretched for nearly a week. And then came the knock. Late afternoon, the sun already low. I opened the door to find Gregory on the porch. No coat, just a sweater and a thin apology clinging to his shoulders. Mom, he said, can we talk? I looked at my son, truly looked. And for the first time, I saw a man who was afraid of losing the woman he thought would never say no. The thing about truth is, when it rises, it doesn't knock. Gregory stood on my porch with his hands jammed into his pockets, shoulders hunched against the cold, though the real chill came from the look in his eyes. I hadn't seen that look since he was 13 and tried to lie about breaking the neighbor's window. He'd always been a terrible liar. His mouth knew the words, but his eyes never followed. I didn't invite him in, not right away. I let the quiet stretch long enough for him to feel it. Then I stepped aside. He walked in slowly, his footsteps tentative against the hardwood I'd refinished myself back when Thomas was still alive. He looked around like the house had changed in his absence. Truth was, it had. It no longer bent toward him. I was hoping we could talk, he said, glancing at the armchair across from mine. I gestured for him to sit. He lowered himself like a man unaccustomed to humility. I know you're upset, he began, but this thing with the bank, it's a misunderstanding. I didn't speak. I waited. He shifted in his seat. The paperwork was more complicated than we thought. Brittany didn't realize how much was in your name. We assumed it was all settled. You assumed wrong, I said softly. There was a flicker of something behind his eyes. Not remorse, calculation. He was measuring the situation, trying to find the angle where sympathy might still earn him a foothold. We're in a tight spot right now. Brittany's car needed repairs. The HVAC unit gave out. We were going to make up the payments this month. I stood and walked to the kitchen, pouring us both tea. When I returned, I placed his cup in front of him. He thanked me like he'd been raised in someone else's house. I sat down slowly. You never paid back the $12,000. His face went blank. The note, I continued, you both signed it, dated it. You said it was for emergency plumbing. I covered it without question. He opened his mouth, then shut it. A child caught with his hand in the jar. The silence filled the room. I've seen the documents, I said. Every payment I made, every transfer. And now I'm the one who has to sit across from lawyers because you two couldn't be honest with yourselves. It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that, I said, my voice firm for the first time in weeks. You took my kindness and turned it into a business model, and now that it's inconvenient, you want to rewrite the story. Gregory ran a hand through his hair. So what now? Are you going to sue us? I leaned forward, my gaze steady. I'm going to protect myself. What that looks like is up to your actions going forward. He stood abruptly, the tea untouched. I didn't come here to get lectured. And I didn't spend a lifetime sacrificing to become a footnote in your household. The door closed harder than necessary behind him. I didn't flinch. The next morning, Caldwell called. He'd received a letter from Gregory's attorney, an attempt to stall the process, claiming family misunderstanding. We both knew it was a stalling tactic. Caldwell remained calm. We're on solid ground, he reassured me. They're trying to buy time, possibly hoping to wear you down. They won't, I said. That week, I gathered everything. The tuition receipts, the utilities I'd paid in secret, even the canceled checks from when they were first married and struggling. All evidence, all quiet proof of the years I spent standing in their financial shadows. I included one final item, a copy of the power of attorney form Brittany had slipped into the refinance package 4 years ago. Back then, she'd called it just a convenience, said it was to save time during paperwork. I'd signed it without question. Now that piece of paper was a loaded gun. Caldwell reviewed it. They may not realize this gives you temporary authority over financial decisions tied to shared obligations. I nodded. Let's remind them. He filed the paperwork the following Monday, citing misuse of shared funds and a conflict of interest. It triggered an immediate review of the mortgage terms. The house was no longer just their problem. It was public. That evening, I sat with Trish on her back porch, watching the clouds drift low and pink over the neighborhood rooftops. "You doing okay?" she asked, offering me a slice of banana bread. "I'm tired," I admitted, "but it's the good kind of tired. Like when you finish scrubbing something that's been dirty so long you forgot what clean looked like." She smiled. "You know what the best part of this is? You didn't scream. You didn't throw things. You didn't write nasty emails. You just walked in with facts and let them feel the consequences." "I had to," I said. "If I let this go, I'd be telling myself I was still the woman who said yes because it was easier." The week dragged on in silence. No more texts, no more cards, just lawyers, letters, and a hollow kind of waiting, until Friday afternoon when a black SUV pulled up outside my house. I watched from the window as Brittany stepped out, her heels clicking sharply on the walkway. She rang the bell like a stranger. I opened the door. Her smile was brittle. "Lorraine," she said, "may I come in?" I nodded slowly and led her to the living room. She sat on the edge of the couch like she thought the cushions might bite her. "I'm not here to argue," she began. "I just wanted to talk woman to woman." "About what?" Her voice dropped. "We didn't expect you to push back like this." I tilted my head. "Why not?" "Because you never have." There it was, the confession, as plain as day. "I think we made a mistake," she said. "We let things get out of hand. We're willing to make some concessions if you'll agree to drop the filings." "And what exactly are you willing to concede?" "We could transfer partial equity, set up monthly repayments. Gregory's opened mediation." I stood. "You think this is about money?" She blinked. "Isn't it?" "No," I said. "It's about finally being seen, being heard, and making sure this kind of quiet betrayal never happens again." She looked genuinely stunned, then defensive. "We're your family, Lorraine. Families fight. Families also apologize. They also return what isn't theirs." Her lips pressed into a thin line. As I walked her to the door, I paused. "Tell Gregory I hope he remembers who I was before he taught me to stop sacrificing." I watched her drive away without a word. That night, I sat by the fireplace, flipping through the last few documents Caldwell had asked me to review. One of them was a title verification, just a formality, except buried in the middle of the text was something new, an outdated lien, filed under my name, from nearly a decade ago. I frowned. I'd never filed a lien, but someone had. And if what I was reading was correct, then technically, legally, I had never been removed from the house title after all. The same hands that held your secrets can also hold the key to your freedom. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the lien document, the sunlight bleeding through the blinds and pooling like gold across the papers. The silence in the house felt different, not lonely, not oppressive, but full of presence, as though all the versions of myself I had tucked away over the years were finally standing with me. The lien wasn't just a footnote. It was a lock that had never been opened, filed years ago as a protection I'd forgotten I'd taken. Back then, Gregory was still finishing his graduate program, and I had paid a substantial portion of their down payment. The bank manager, an older gentleman who had handled our accounts for years, had advised I place a lien just in case the arrangement changes down the road. I hadn't understood the full weight of it at the time, only that it gave me a kind of insurance. Now that piece of forgotten advice was about to reshape everything. I called Caldwell the moment his office opened. He answered on the second ring. "I've reviewed the paperwork," I told him. "There's a lien in my name on the property. It was never removed." He paused, clearly pulling the file up in his mind. I remember seeing an early entry in the property records but assumed it had been resolved. If it's still active, that changes everything. How much? It means you have a legal hold on the title. They can't sell, refinance, or transfer ownership without resolving it. And depending on the amount originally attached, you might hold majority leverage. I exhaled slowly. So what do? We use it. That afternoon, I met him at his office, and together we drafted a formal notice to Gregory and Brittany, delivered via certified mail. In it, Caldwell stated clearly that the lien was valid, active, and enforceable. The amount due was calculated, principal, interest, and fees, nearly $83,000, more than either of them likely had sitting in their accounts. We gave them two options: settle and sign the property over to me in lieu of payment, or face a formal foreclosure process. Both options led to the same outcome: ownership returning to me, legally and publicly. 3 days passed without a response. Then, on the 4th, their attorney called Caldwell in a panic. The lien had caught them completely off guard. I imagined Brittany sitting at her kitchen table, manicured hands trembling as she reread the notice. I imagined Gregory's voice rising, not in sorrow, but in disbelief. They hadn't expected me to have the foresight. They'd counted on my memory fading like wallpaper in a sunlit room, but I hadn't forgotten everything. That weekend, the storm finally broke. A second letter arrived. An offer. They would sign over full ownership of the house in exchange for dropping any further financial claims, as long as I kept the matter private. No court filings, no public record of foreclosure, a quiet transfer. It was the smartest move they'd made since this began. Caldwell drafted the paperwork. I reviewed every line. This time, no trust, no assumptions. Just legal protection, notarized and sealed. The signing was scheduled at a neutral title office, a modern glass building overlooking the river. I arrived early, dressed in navy slacks and a winter coat buttoned high. I didn't bring Trish. I didn't bring anyone. I needed to walk in alone. Gregory and Brittany arrived 5 minutes late. She wore sunglasses even though we were indoors. He looked tired, drawn. We sat across from each other. The silence as thick as snowfall. The attorney overseeing the transfer spoke calmly, professionally. Each of us signed in turn, page after page. When it was over, the attorney slid the final document into a manila folder and smiled faintly. "Congratulations, Ms. Mercer. As of today, you are the sole title holder of the property at Hollow Birch Lane." I looked across the table, not gloating, not triumphant, just still. Gregory spoke first. "So that's it?" I met his eyes. "That's it." Brittany opened her mouth but said nothing. Her voice, like her influence, had finally run out of air. I left the office with the folder tucked tightly under my arm. The cold wind greeted me outside, but I welcomed it. It felt like clarity. Back home, I placed the signed deed in the top drawer of my filing cabinet. Then I walked through every room of my house. Mine. No more gray areas, no more blurred lines, just walls that had witnessed everything and stood firm. Trish came over that evening with a bottle of sparkling cider. We sat on the porch wrapped in blankets, watching the stars blink awake. "You did it," she whispered. "You really did it." "I did," I said, staring out at the stillness. And not because I wanted revenge. I just wanted to stop being the woman everyone assumed would never say no. Over the next few weeks, something shifted. not just in my house, but in me. I started volunteering at the local health clinic again, just 2 days a week. Enough to keep my mind sharp. I signed up for a book club at the library. I joined Trish and her sister for Sunday breakfast at the diner. And slowly the rhythm of my days changed from one of reaction to one of choice. Gregory called once 2 weeks after the final signing. I let it go to voicemail. "Hey, Mom, I wanted to say I'm sorry for all of it. I understand now. I hope someday we can talk again. No expectations. Just, I miss you." I listened, then deleted the message. Some bridges don't burn in fire. They collapse under silence, and some silences are sacred. Weeks turned to months. Spring came early that year. I planted daffodils along the front walkway, the soil rich and soft beneath my gloves. I cooked for myself again, not rushed, not in service of anyone else's schedule. I bought new curtains. I painted the guest room. One morning, while watering the garden, I found a letter tucked into the mailbox. Inside was a photo, my grandchildren, smiling in front of their school science fair project, a note beneath in Gregory's handwriting. "They ask about you." I held it for a long time. Then I folded it neatly, placed it in a drawer. Someday, perhaps, but not yet. The past had left its signature in ink and silence, and now, for the first time in years, the future was mine to write in full. And so I stood on the porch of the house they thought they owned, breathing in the morning air. My name, only mine, etched on every page they never bothered to read. There comes a quiet morning somewhere between late spring and early summer when the world no longer feels like something I need to brace myself against. The air comes through the kitchen window, soft and golden, carrying the scent of cut grass and the distant sound of a neighbor's wind chimes. I sit with my cup of coffee, 1 sugar, no cream, wrapped in the same old robe I've had for years, but somehow it fits better now. Maybe it's me that fits better now, because for the first time in what feels like a lifetime, I don't owe anyone anything. Not an apology, not an explanation, not another second of silence. I think back to how I used to move through this house like a ghost in my own story, folding their laundry, wiring their mortgage payments, biting my tongue through slights so sharp they left invisible scars. I tell myself I was doing it for love, for family, for the good of the whole. But what I was really doing was disappearing piece by piece. And the cruelest part? They didn't even notice. Or maybe they did. Maybe they were counting on it. It's funny how betrayal doesn't come loudly. It tiptoes. It wears the face of people you once rocked to sleep. It comes with smiles and thank yous that rot the longer you hold them. But the truth waits. It files itself quietly away, behind old receipts and notarized pages and promises written in ink. And when the moment comes, it doesn't need to shout. It simply unfolds. When I found that lean document tucked between old files, I didn't feel rage. I felt something steadier, older, like the strength I'd been storing in my bones had finally remembered its name. They thought I was a footnote in their financial plans, a safety net, a bank with a mother's face, but what they forgot was that I watched, I remembered, I prepared. Not out of malice, but out of a kind of quiet hope that someday I might need to stand, and I did stand. Not with fists, not with screaming, but with a lawyer, a paper trail, and the kind of grace that doesn't beg to be seen. It just is. And when it was over, when the keys were mine, the deed signed, and the silence finally mine to keep, I didn't feel like I'd won a war. I felt like I'd come home. I didn't do it to punish them. I did it to reclaim myself. Because respect isn't owed blindly. It's earned, sometimes over decades, and when it's stripped away, you have every right to walk back into your story and write a better ending. Gregory's voice on that voicemail haunts me sometimes. The softness in it, the smallness. He never thought I'd say no. And maybe that was my fault. I taught him that I'd always say yes, that love was something you proved with silence. I was wrong. Love, real love, has boundaries. It has no written in its language. It has enough carved into its spine. I still miss my grandchildren. I imagine them running through the yard, chasing fireflies, not knowing the storm that once threatened to pull this house apart. Maybe one day they'll come to know the story not from whispers or bitterness, but from a place of honesty. Maybe they'll learn that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it speaks in clipped sentences and signed documents and walking away when the heart is still tender. I have my garden now, my porch. My evenings filled with soft music and the slow return of things I used to love. My laugh is different, lower, but more true. My shoulders are lighter. I no longer flinch when the phone rings, because I know now that I can let it go unanswered and the world won't crumble. If you've ever been taken for granted, if your kindness was mistaken for ignorance, or your silence interpreted as weakness, I hope you heard something familiar in my story. You're not alone, and you're not powerless. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop. Stop giving. Stop explaining. Stop showing up for people who only open their hands when they need something from yours. You have the right to take up space in your own life, to protect your peace, to say without guilt, "This is mine. I earned it, and I will not hand it over." So if this story moved you, if it reminded you of something you once gave and never got back, or of someone who finally stood up and said no more, go ahead and like this video. It means more than you know. And if you'd like to hear more stories like mine, stories where the overlooked become the undeniable, please subscribe to our channel. There's another story just around the corner, and it might be the one you've been waiting for. As for me, I'll be here, with my morning coffee, my daffodils, and my name written in bold ink on every line they forgot to read. My philosophy remains, let them underestimate you. Just don't do it to yourself.